Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Hello, I am 34 years old. I live in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. I was 13 when this happened. I lived in the same town my whole life, except for 1 year when I traveled to Halifax and visited Shag Harbour. I was absolutely absorbed and terrified by my experience. I thrust myself into the world of ufology. I spent the next 5 years reading, watching, and looking at every single photo, video, article, sighting, encounter, etc. I could find it. I talked to people online and in my area. I visited Shag Harbour. I spent my entire teen life and still to this day researching from a place of science. So, it was a Friday. I remember because I was allowed to stay up as long as I want on weekends. It was around 9:30 p.m. after getting off the computer and getting ready to read and watch some TV or game. I was always interested in science and space and the beauty of it. I had an uncle that always told me who to look up to, scientists and rational thinkers. He got me very into science as a whole. Feynman, Gauss, Newton, Riemann, Sagan. I remember the night clearly though. My living room at the time had a window above me behind the TV. So I am watching TV. I don't remember what exactly, but I remember flicking off the VHS tape and turning the PlayStation on and playing Spyro. It was about 2:30 or 3 a.m. at this point. My father got up to use the washroom and went back to bed. I got up to get a drink and saw something out of the corner of my eye, outside the window and above the high school. I literally could walk outside my house, take 2 steps, and I was on school property. I see this light above the school. I figured it was a meteor shower or space junk. I grabbed the binoculars. I looked out the window to see if I could see it. I couldn't really get a good look, it was too blurry through the window. So, I went outside to have a look. It was not very bright in my small town. I look out towards the school. I see something I can only describe as a ball metal. Almost like a flowing liquid metal, but to my eyes seemed like it was taking the form of a sphere, condensing in on itself from time to time, and rippling, as if the surface rippled like water. The light from it appeared that way. It was circular, bright white, almost silvery. At times it seemed that the light coming from it faded, and I could see that it was a solid sphere, silver in appearance. I do not know how big it would be. I guess would be the size of a 2-seater passenger plane. It darted from above the school to the hospital in a blink of an eye. The distance was about 1/4 kilometer, but on a somewhat linear path. I had my eyes glued to it and it blinked out of existence. It is the only way I can describe it. I could no longer see it. I scanned around the sky with the binoculars, then found it was above a church about a full kilometer away. Same strange ball rippling like metal. I was outside for I believe 25 to 30 minutes. Based on my coming back between 3:30 a.m. and 4 a.m. My brain could not comprehend what I was seeing. I literally thought I was dreaming or experiencing some type of hallucination. I felt as if what I was seeing was straight out of a movie or sci-fi book. It was like it was darting around our entire town at random intervals, going from one part to another within a blink of an eye. The distance it traveled from the school to the hospital to the church is in total 1.4 kilometers. I snapped and for some reason started crying. I ran to my dad and woke him up. "It's a satellite," is what he said. My father enjoyed watching stuff on UFOs and personally believed the US government covered something up about Roswell. But I never ever really said too much. He told me to go to sleep. I was terrified, for whatever reason. I was so scared after it, I did not sleep for months unless one of my parents was awake while I fell asleep. I really struggled with whatever I experienced that night for a very long time. It was a horrific experience for me and hard to even talk about. I had extreme anxiety and depression from it. I was only a teenager, just barely. I found myself being paranoid. I did not want to be alone at all. Anywhere. In the daytime, I would make sure I always knew where someone was. I never was alone. I was so afraid, I started saying prayers. I spent the next 5 years looking at everything I could that was related to UFOs. The sensation I had from it. I felt a kind of oneness, but also so completely overwhelmed with fear. It felt as if my skin was trying to escape my body. My spine burned and the entire time I was filled with thoughts of, "This is amazing and I am going to die. I need to get in the house." All the hair on my body was standing up. I was sweating. When I got in the house, my shirt was nearly stuck to me in sweat. My father thought I went outside and got attacked and ran away. I was crying, rambling about some craft in the sky and how it was going to get me. My father told me he had never seen anyone so absolutely terrified before. That I was nervous and would look out the windows at night and make sure I was okay. I have never been so afraid in my life of anything. My body was telling me I was going to die. My father didn't like me waking him so I could sleep. My mother, well, was not in the picture. My father's reaction is based on a sighting he had in the 70s that some people in the town saw. He was ridiculed by people for talking about the craft he saw so close to the ground it looked like it was going to land, and in a blink of an eye, it darted off and was gone. He said it was circular in shape, like the classic UFO, glowed bright yellow, and had a low hum to it. He doesn't really like talking about it.
This started back in July 2018. In order to make some sense of it, I have to give a little background info on how it came to be. I'm a 62-year-old woman now and have been interested in Bigfoot since I was 14. My father had piqued my interest. He was from Nanaimo, British Columbia originally, and was a hunter back in his day on Vancouver Island. He never had a sighting but did tell us of his many hunting stories. Going forward to 2018, I sat in my apartment in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, gazing out the window at the beautiful blue sunny sky, and was thinking to myself, will I ever get to see Bigfoot before I die? After years of videos and reading on the subject and being middle-aged, it was only a mere dream of mine to one day see this being. A little thought has planted a seed and you see an intention. I never knew it to be possible, but it happened to me quite inadvertently. I'm a nurse and I travel to my workplace in Musquodoboit Harbour. I am an empath and I've discovered that I can read people very well. This morning I drove the 30-minute drive to this small rural village that is coastal. There's a small hospital there and adjacent to that was the nursing home. They both shared a rear parking lot where the staff would park facing the two buildings. The hospital is on the left and the nursing home is on the right. To get to the rear parking lot you must pass both buildings and drive in on the left of that hospital. Once you pass that hospital's left side, you have to round the 90-degree bend to get to the lot to park. Just off this bend in the road is a dirt road that leads down through a forest area to an old house occupied by an old man that sometimes would show up in the parking lot with his dog. I'm driving into work that morning, and as I drive to the parking lot, as I'm nearing the 90-degree bend, I see Bigfoot only 75 yards in on the old man's dirt road. He's standing there facing the parking lot and helicopter pad through a thin line of trees. He's just standing there. He does not look at me. He has to know I'm here though by this time. I've taken my foot off the gas pedal and I've rolled to a stop. My mind is racing. Can I get to my iPhone that's in my scrubs pocket? No, I don't want to take my eyes off him. I literally talked it out in my mind to myself while keeping my eyes on him. I drink him with my eyes. I say to myself what a fine-looking beast he is. I see his wispy hair moving gently in the morning sun, the long hair on his long arms. I see it fluttering. He's a brown color with reddish tints. From the side, I can see his profile and his face very well. His face skin is pale-like and his head is conical in shape, with no neck that I can see. He's looking more like a man than anything else. Only his body hair is longish. I feel completely calm now. I'm in this peaceful moment in time and it feels amazing I'm getting my wish to see this creature. This amazing day. I'm still sitting in my car and seeing that this Bigfoot is not your typical robust body type, but rather like a tall, hairy man. Just as quick as I was in that moment, I was out of it, like a bubble popping. I was made to feel like going now. I know he allowed me to see him without making eye contact too. His stare and his stance was directed through that thin tree line towards where I needed to go. A slight fear grew over me as I put my car in drive and went to the parking area. As I drove, I felt intense fear. I backed the car into the side of my car trying to see if I could see him, but I could not, and in an almost panic I got ready to run the distance with my swipe card to the rear door to my place of work. Boy, was I glad that the terminal worked today of all days. Once inside, I peered out again to see if I could see him. I could not. I told my boss about my sighting and she did not doubt me, as her husband is a true believer in Bigfoot. My reason to tell her was for the safety of others that worked outdoors, mainly the maintenance crew. One of the crews I was able to speak to had agreed with me and shared his experiences with Bigfoot, which was awesome to hear. People here do not willingly share their experiences. I'm sharing mine because I feel the need to let others know it's real, very real. Mine speaking happened to me. I got what I wished for. I'm thankful for my experience. It can happen to you with really nothing but an intention, and that's my story.
For years I have been exploring the woods, valleys, and caves of Nova Scotia for mystery, history, and adventure. I've seen some things in my younger, less educated years that I assumed were normal because I didn't catch the nuances of mystery. I just rolled my eyes at the tales told from, I assumed, was the bottom of a whiskey bottle as years passed. Well, it was about 2010 when I was around 30 when things started making me question as I began going alone in the woods in search of caves and historical spots. Whether it was caves in limestone and gypsum of central Nova Scotia and east, or huge crevices in the basalt and granites of the Annapolis Valley. There has always been something to look for or be told about by the elder generations. Treasures, Acadians, Indians, and creatures of unknown origins have all been included in things told to me. And then there are the things no one told me about. I had read about a find of an old Acadian vase along Bloody Creek around the 1880s, which was then shown at the World's Fair. It was said to have been found in a cave along the shallow but wide creek's upper reaches near the mountain. Over the course of weeks I walked the creek looking on both sides, up to the gravel pit that was quarrying granite gravels, and past it, up the mountain a fair way to an old power dam from the 1890s that provided electricity to a place called Paradise. It was September, and I decided to cross the creek and look in some suspect areas I had passed by before, but the sun went down faster than I thought it would, so I was caught with a piece of junk keychain light to light up about an inch in front of me. My mind was playing tricks on me on the way back and I kept hearing birds in the brook but could not see anything. The following evening I went back with a new headlamp and upon the return seen eyes reflecting back silvery and bobbing up and down behind a rock. I thought an animal had its family there for a drink, so I cut away and beat through the bush to avoid disturbing things. I bought a much better flashlight so I could look a lot more after 8:30 p.m. sundown. This was my fourth time I stayed after dark, about 2 weeks after the keychain walk. Once again, I started hearing splashes in the creek following me. The splashes would stop when I turned to look, but this time there were sounds like a bird chirping, a croak like a frog going on, and the eyes bobbing up and down behind sizable boulders. It was in the final stretch from the creek to the base of the small slope that went to the road my car was parked at that things finally got insane. I had walked halfway to the slope and noticed it was silent. Not a breeze. Even the creek sounded like it was under blankets in a muffled manner. I turned around to see what was behind me and my world got crazier when I cranked my newest light up to full. Peering from behind a tree, about 16 inches high, was a round face with a wide mouth and round, silvery unblinking eyes that ducked behind the tree again. To the right near a fallen tree, in plain view, stood a little humanoid that was 18 inches tall, with a dark-skinned wiry muscular body with long white, brown, and gray hair coming from the rounded head and down to the back of its knees, a huge fluff of pubes. It looked like hair grew on the shoulders and back as well when it turned its torso. When it croaked out, I finally came to my senses and saw there were a half-dozen other small humanoids peeking around or walking towards me slowly, and most had what looked like sharpened sticks. I turned around and behind me at the slope was another one with a stick, but I ran frantically towards the slope top. I turned around and saw them hiding, and how it looked with their coloration. They camouflaged into the natural setting quickly. I also saw a big onion bag placed under a spruce tree, filled with vegetables and packaged candy, chocolate, and spam, along with cheeses in baggies and still mostly frozen so it would all last. I don't know what I saw, but I knew somehow that bag of stuff would have become my garnishments as I became the main course in some cold hole in the earth. They looked like they had heads very similar to where the wild things are, creatures, with rounded silver eyes that did not blink or move. I went home that night wondering if what I'd seen was from a bump on my head I didn't know about or something. I decided to go back and look in the daytime again, but I stopped and went in from another direction, beside the 101 highway where it crosses over the creek. Parting the trees as I walked towards the area in question, I instantly realized it was a bone field I was walking through of a few deer and smaller animals. Many of the bones were chewed on and smashed up. At first glance it just looked like a spot where animals got hit by cars on the provincial highway. Cars don't leave small childlike teeth marks on porcupine bones, nor do they splinter bones on the spot 30 feet off the road, leaving them sucked empty. Cars don't. But carnivores do. I went back again, but never alone after I realized someone was feeding those goblins. possibly to keep things safe and left alone, as I learned may have been the case at a much later time. And I got a machete for such things indeed, go bump at night and in the daylight. But that's for later.
I grew up in a rural community in Nova Scotia, where the closest kids were 10-minute walk away. We always had wildlife living in our backyard, from bears to coyotes, owls, foxes, even skunks and porcupines. I was very familiar, as my father was a hunter and taught us the sounds and tracks and even the awful smells of the life around us. I'm 20 now and live in a large town on the outskirts of Halifax. I remember the first signs starting around the age of 14 or 15. I would be trying to sleep with my window open at night during the summer, and I would hear these mutilated howls. I've never heard the likes of before, which would terrify me into slamming shut my window, closing my blinds and locking what I could around the home. I would spend time outdoors or walking home from the bus stop and see massive paw prints or sometimes barefoot human prints on the sandy gravel road. There were these moments of awful stench. My mother would always claim it to be just the coons in the compost bins again. But there was no way on earth that's what this was. I began to spend less and less time out there due to feeling watched and unsafe. I didn't know what else to do. My dad left my mom, and my stepfather was a city man who thought I was simply scared to be out. There was one event 3 years ago when I was 17. We had a family friend who had a camp 40 minutes out into the middle of nowhere, and of course, being myself, I wanted to go and hang out with all my friends near my age. So we went. No cell service, no plumbing, all electricity was solar-powered, outhouse and all camp on a lake. None of my friends were there, and all the adults went down 3 camps off for drinks, and I was stuck with all the kids 13 and under. Free babysitting, am I right? Anyway, to the point. I had settled in and was reading a book with my flashlight while the kids were watching a movie on their tablet. What's the point of camping if you're on your electronics? And I heard the sound of someone in the driveway, footsteps on the gravel. I got up from my book and went to see if it was one of the adults from the group, but as soon as I stuck my head out the door and noticed an awful rotten stench when the sound stopped and there was no one there. I swear I'd never felt so chilled as I did at that moment. The hair on my neck was raised and I slammed the door shut, loudly, and locked it. That night, when the adults were back, we paired up to go to the outhouse before bed. Of course, myself and the family friend were the last 2 out there. I had done what needed doing and was waiting for my friend. That's when the twigs snapped and the chills were back. I saw movement. A large dark almost black dog-like shape was off in the tree line. I froze. It was darting around, so fast, I wouldn't have believed the speed if I hadn't seen it. My friend came out of the outhouse and the latch snapped my attention from it to her. She was concerned about how pale I was, but when I tried to point it out, it was gone. Poof. We went inside, and all throughout the night I could hear howling and barks and sounds from outside. It reminded me of the whole laughter sound from hyenas. But every so often there was this awful deep choppy howl of a sound no coyote could make. It wasn't the scream of a dying rabbit or the laughter from a fox, it was not natural. It was twisted. I tell this because about a month ago I was out with my boyfriend for a late-night drive along the coast, off a distance from the city. While he was driving and we were talking, we both saw something massive. It was dark, almost black in color, dog-like in structure, and there was an awful, unforgettable smell in the air. We both were shouting and sped off away from it. I convinced him it was just a black bear, but there was no way. It was far too large and thin for a bear in the late summer. I know it was that thing. But anytime I tell someone about it, I'm told I'm crazy. I'm just hearing about coyotes as we don't have wolves in our province. Should I be worried? Scared even? We live in a town close to the city. I wouldn't think it would follow us here. But I can't help but feel anxious. Am I crazy? What is this thing? It didn't make any moves after us. It didn't even look in our direction.
Just wanted to share my experience. Please keep in mind my experience happened 5 or 6 years ago now. I spent the night at my ex's place in a very rural small town outside of New Glasgow, Nova Scotia called Westville. We were up very late watching UFC. probably 1 a.m., and I went into the back bedroom of the house on the second floor and happened to glance out the window towards the backyard. His backyard was long and rectangular in shape and had an embankment that sloped down to a tree line at the end of the yard, which was nothing but woods from beyond that point. When looking out the window, I noticed something very pale white crawling through the tree line. It immediately caught my eye and I kept staring at it. I called my ex at the time to come in and look. We both got really quiet, and we came to realize that we weren't witnessing a creature that either of us could recognize. It was human-like in form, very skinny, purely pale, and crouched forward with very long arms and would make a few movements forwards towards the yard and then back deeper into the woods again. We had horrible phones back then at the time. I had an old BlackBerry and his was no better, and they both couldn't record what our eyes were seeing in the pitch black of night in the country. The only thing I could think of to do at this time was to call my older brother, who has an interest in paranormal topics. I called him and described to him everything that we were seeing, and to this day he doesn't disbelieve my accounts in any fashion. Something I said over and over to him on the phone was, "It's not moving like a human, its movements are really, really strange." They were almost spastic in nature, nothing natural or orderly that I could make sense of compared to how other mammals move. It made no noise that I could hear through the window. I was terrified but watched this thing crawl around for a solid 2 hours. Years later, my brother found the more popular YouTube video now of the crawler in the backyard or some guy's house, and he called his preacher. That was so scarily similar to my experience that I got full chills, goosebumps, and started to cry. It really, really hit me and solidified that we weren't somehow losing it or making it up, that we actually saw with our own eyes a crawler that night. What that man recorded is exactly what he saw a few years back, so even though I'm only one person, I 100% can say that is the most legit video of the crawler on YouTube. Something else that was also really messed up about my experience that I have zero explanation for is that the crawler could be seen down on the left-hand side crawling around the tree line, but for a few moments we saw a glowing deep yellow orb floating between the tree line for a few moments as well. I'm wondering if there are any other accounts like this. As I've mentioned in my story, this was an ex, so we are no longer together, so I have no idea if he continued living there or ever saw such a sight again in his backyard. I've always been curious if it's still out there, and I often think about my experience as I can recall it in high detail like it was yesterday. I'll never forget what I saw until the day I die.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.